Welcome to Nuances, Beyond First Impressions with the Asian Diaspora.
I'm Ariadna Milla, a Filipino-American from a small town on the southern border in Texas.
I'm Sherilyn Lee, a new American with Chinese Mauritian roots.
Together, we wanted to create a safe space where everyone feels welcome to learn more about the AAPI community.
We hope that through the personal stories we'll hear, we'll all get a glimpse of the humanity behind the stereotypes, how we have so much in common in some ways and so little in other ways.
Before we get into our conversation with Cece, we would like to take a few moments to define some terms that come up throughout our conversation. The first is gaslighting. This is to manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity or their own reality. Body dysphoria. This is a mental health condition in which you can't stop thinking about one or more perceived defects or flaws in your appearance. Body dysphoria can often be caused by abuse, bullying, and can be exacerbated by seeing unrealistic beauty standards in the media. The next term we have is transphobia and homophobia. This is a collection of ideas and phenomena that encompass a range of negative attitudes, feelings, or actions towards LGBTQ+ people or transness and homosexuality in general. Intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Intersectionality identifies multiple factors of advantage and disadvantage. Third culture kids, abbreviated as TCKs, is people who are raised in a culture other than their parents or the culture of their country of nationality, and also live in a different environment during a significant part of their child development years. Third culture kids move between cultures before they have had the opportunity to fully develop their personal and cultural identity. Patriarchy is a system of society in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. Misogyny is hatred of, contempt for, or prejudice against women. Misogyny is a form of sexism that keeps women at a lower social status than men, thus maintaining the societal roles of patriarchy. The next term we have is allyship. This is an active, consistent, and arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating in which a person in a position of privilege and power seeks to operate in solidarity with a marginalized group. And the final term we have is Eurocentric. This is focusing on European culture or history to the exclusion of a wider view of the world, implicitly regarding European culture as preeminent. For example, Eurocentric beauty standards are typically the dominant beauty standard in society, which marginalizes women of color who do not have Eurocentric features. Without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Cece. Today we are here with Cece Chow. Cece Chow is a visual artist connecting people through plants, a filmmaker connecting people through story, and a trans fashion model and advocate, creating positive QTPOC representation. Cece, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to all these multiple careers that you're pursuing at the same time.
I grew up in the late 70s and 80s and 90s in southern Alberta, in Calgary. How do I put this? I was raised as the eldest boy to immigrant parents who are from Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And for listeners who cannot see me, I am a trans woman. I was assigned male at birth. And so the way I was raised was sort of as this eldest male heir to the name of the family and of not just my nuclear family, but of the whole extended family on my dad's side. My dad is the youngest of all his brothers, and all of his brothers had daughters, all daughters. So when I was born, they looked between my legs and they're like, yes, this is our golden child, Little did they know. And southern Alberta is very white. It's quite conservative. In all of my life here, I've known once where we had a non-conservative government. And I grew up as one of the few kids of color in elementary school. Junior high was very much similar. There were lots of Asians in high school because it was like in a more central school. But at that point, I was no longer able to relate to them. I don't know. I went to university, got a computer science degree. I did that for quite some time. And I did the thing getting married and having kids and buying houses. And now I'm going back the other way where I'm no longer married and I no longer have a house. And I still have my kids, which is amazing. And I'm working on all these different things that I never could have foreseen in high school or university when I was like, I'm going to become a software engineer or whatever.
Yeah, it's quite a journey that you've gone through. You mentioned that you were the only person of color for a while. Is there an Asian community there now? Do you have this sort of Asian Canadian identity, or do you not feel represented by that group?
That's a really interesting question. For some background on that, when I was growing up, there were 4, maybe 5 kids in the whole elementary school. And for some reason, we were all in the same class, in the same grade. And we worked very hard, or at least I did. We tried very hard to be like white.
Yeah.
Because it was safer to distance ourselves from our cultures because we got picked on and we got made fun of. And it was looking back, it's, oh shit, that was racist.
Yeah.
But growing up in it as kids, we didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And the teachers, they didn't see that either. There is an Asian community. There's a Vietnamese community, like a Chinese community, a Filipino community. There is this Asian community, but it's really hard to connect. At this point, I think along with my transition and finding myself, understanding who I am, there's this whole of I am Chinese. And yes, we did some Chinese things when we were growing up in our family and in our extended family, but I never had the cultural context. It's I do these things, but I don't know really what they mean in the context of Chinese society and history and stuff. There's this sort of cultural hole, but that it's hard to fill because it's so challenging to connect with my own community. And part of that, I'm sure, is just still that internalized racism. And then the other side of that is, as a queer trans woman, Asian cultures tend to just not do well with other. It's all about keep the harmony, don't say things, suffer through whatever you have to suffer to keep the family honor and to keep the honor of our people, and don't screw it up. It doesn't matter if you're suffering, don't screw it up. And so it's really hard to go into those spaces as the other.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, I'm just like you. But inside, I'm like, I'm pretty sure they don't see me as just like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Many of the guests, I think maybe all the guests that we've had so far have said that we all experience a level of disconnect with the culture because we didn't grow up in, whichever country our ancestors came from, whether it's China or the Philippines or whatever. Growing up somewhere else, yeah, we do have some of the traditions, but just like you said, we don't really know the context or the history or why we do them, or many of us don't speak the language. So it's a very common experience that most of us feel like we're the only ones. But then when we started interviewing people, we found that was the most common experience, that actually most of us don't speak the language, have not really been to the home country.
Yeah, I think that's why there's that distinction of being Asian American or Asian Canadian, because our experience growing up in a diaspora community is so different. And whenever I go back to Asia, I am reminded of how I don't belong here either. I'm Filipino, so I don't speak any Mandarin, but I was in Taiwan and someone just went up to me and started speaking Mandarin. And it's weird because I have to be like, actually, I don't speak Mandarin. And then they hear my accent and they're like, oh, she's American. And so, yeah, I think that's something we can all connect with, is just that feeling of they don't really necessarily see us as exactly like them.
I had a similar experience in Hong Kong where we went up to this little diner shop thing where like you order from the window and then you take it to go. And I can speak Cantonese on a pretty elementary level, but I'm like, hey, can you recommend something? And they're like, oh, the menu's right on the wall. And I was like, oh, I can't read. And he was like, why can't you read? As an adult, and they're like, you look like you went to school. Like, why can't I read English? I read French. I'm not Chinese. Yeah.
You mentioned you were a software engineer before. How did you decide to change careers? What was that like?
I got my computer science degree at the University of Calgary. I started working right out of school. I worked in a lot of startups and stuff and made a 16-year career out of it. And at first it was really exciting and really fun. It was really fast paced and I would never go back to that. You got to get into everything. We got to build computer servers and write the database, the front end, build the production servers, and got to play with all the things. And I love that. And the further on I got into my career, the less of that I got, the more pay I got, but the more railroaded I got into very specific roles. And looking back on my first few jobs, I would be there for 4 years or 2, 3 years. And a lot of times the companies just went belly up because startups, that's just the nature. But the further along I got into bigger companies, the more challenging it got to maintain interest, because I'm the type of person, if I am not learning things, then I feel like I'm going backwards. I cannot just sit in one place and do the same thing over and over. And it's just, I can't. The last big company I worked with was Symantec, and it was just like, okay, you do this tiny little thing. You need a database thing, just tell the database person and wait for them to do it. And then they'll send you the thing. And I'm like, but they're busy. I could just do this in a couple of minutes and then I could be moving on with my project, but I can't. It was super frustrating. But through that, I was very good at taking my work home with me in my heart and in my mind. And that meant that when I went home, I wasn't really fully present at home with my spouse at the time or with my kids. And then I stumbled on a thing called kokedama. So it's a Japanese planting style. You can think of it as mossball plants growing out of a moss ball. This looks really fun. I wanted to get into bonsai, but that looked really intimidating. And so I just started mucking around in this kokedama planting style. And I was finding that doing that, somehow it was this connection with nature, feeling things with my hands and smelling things that were not plastic and metal, that I would come home. I think a lot of people experience this, being stuck at work and coming home and not being able to be at home. Mm-hmm. And my thought was, I'm gonna make a business out of this. I'm gonna get this in people's homes and in the places where they hang out. And hopefully they will connect with the plants and that they will come home. I started doing that. I was doing markets and stuff. And then the last big company I worked with was oil and gas. I did 2 years of that. And I was like, oh, I can't do this. I'll go through a day and all I've done is wave my fingers over a keyboard and caressed a mouse all day. And what do I have to show for it? I don't know. It felt like I didn't do anything all day. What did I do? I don't know. I did do one more job, sort of part-time. And I was like, to my wife at the time, I was like, hey, I think I want to try to do this plant thing, this kokedama thing full-time. I think I want to make a real business out of it, not just a hobby business. And she was like, okay, you should. You supported me through school and starting my accounting business. It's your turn. Go for it. Do it. And little did I know that would set me on this huge journey of self-discovery, because I'd spent 16 years identifying as, who are you? Oh, I'm a software developer. But now that I was giving that up, it's, oh, I'm not a software developer anymore. Wait a minute. My career, our careers do not define who we are as people, because I'm still here, but I'm not a software developer. So who am I really? Who am I? That set me on this whole path of self-discovery, of understanding who I am and the things that I've struggled with my whole life that never made sense. How do I make sense of them? What or who am I after going through all of those experiences and coming out the other side?
Everything that you said, it resonates so strongly with me, because I went through a similar path, although I didn't stay in tech that long. So I got the computer science degree. I went into the startup scene. I loved wearing all the hats. Then our startup got acquired by a big company in Silicon Valley. So I moved to Silicon Valley. And at first, the team I joined was small and I was still wearing a lot of hats. And I felt like my work was meaningful, that I was having an impact on this now very big product. And then as the years went by, I felt like my impact was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I had a similar thing where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then I had the crisis of, but if I quit, who am I? When I was in crisis mode, I felt like I defined my entire identity as the smart one who went to engineering school and who does the coding. Then I wanted to do music and I was like, so does that mean I'm not smart? What? I had this whole meltdown of, who the hell am I? Finally, I was like, you know what? This doesn't define me. Engineering is just one thing I do, and who cares? Who cares if people think that now that I'm no longer an engineer, I'm not smart? I don't care what they think.
But our families care.
Yeah.
True.
right?
Yeah, that was the hardest part.
Right? Because it's not only us building these identities, but there's that stereotype of Asians are engineers, doctors, accountants. And it's, oh yes, there are people out there and they're artists. They do beautiful things, this and this, but not my kid.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to do that. Your parents and your cousins and aunts and uncles or whatever see how smart this child is. They're fulfilling the, I don't know, the Asian dream or whatever it is. Like they're doing their job that they were born to do. And then being like, actually, no, I'm an artist. This thing was just a stepping stone.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing to navigate with the family. I felt a lot of pressure because of where I was working. The people associated with me, like my family, inherited that status. And then I was taking that away from them. And I felt really guilty about that. I still do sometimes.
It's so hard to unlearn. I struggle with that too. Even with music, sometimes who am I outside of making music? Growing up, what you did was tied to who you are. Who you are wasn't just something that existed on its own by default. You defined your value based on what you do. And so in my family, people who were doctors, that was always the first thing they would say, oh, this is my son, he's a doctor, this is my daughter, she's a nurse, whatever. And yeah, it's the first thing they would say when I would go visit family, the first question they would ask me would be, what do you do? Where do you work? When I graduated college, so what are you going to do now? How much money are you making? It's a process to separate yourself from that mentality of what you do and your job, define who you are and defining your value.
That's interesting because I think it doesn't only happen in our careers, it happens in our family relationships as well. Like for me, being raised as this eldest boy, golden child, there was a lot of privilege in it where people would give me all the best things, even aunts and uncles. There was just a level of respect that I was given because I was this heir to the name. And my dad went from being the lowest ranked brother to the top of the chain because his line was going to carry the name of the family. I tried really hard to fill those shoes, even though so many of the things were just unspoken. It's even going to school and getting a degree and getting a respectable, I'm doing air quotes, respectable job, having kids and carry on the name and all the rest. And of course, I helped make 2 kids. They're both boys. And that was a huge thing. And then to come to a point where it was like, you know what? I was never a boy. I was never a man. I was never a husband or a son or a father. Those are all roles that I played, but those were never me. And it was really hard. It was really hard to come out as trans and to be like, those were the roles that the world made me play and made me fill. But this is who I am. I am a woman. And from face, like Asian face, it's like, why would you give up all of the best things culturally? These are the best things. You get all the best because you're this firstborn boy, whatever. Like that was my job. And then suddenly I was nobody in my family. I was the black sheep. I was the disappointment. I was the one who's weird and the one that my family doesn't want to talk about anymore, where before it was like, oh yeah, my nephew is blah, 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 successful and, has kids and this and that. And then suddenly nobody wanted to talk about me. Nobody really wanted to talk to me, to know me. And I think something that in queer representation, what we see in media is white gay men. And for Asian, we're either deep in the closet and can't come out because we're like, I'm going to lose everything because my family is everything.
Yeah.
But that's how we're raised.
Yeah.
I am not just me. I am my family and my family is me. And so a lot of queer Asian people can't come out of the closet because they're like, I'm going to lose me. I'm going to lose everything. And in white queer spaces, people will be like, fuck your family, just be you and be yourself. You're amazing. But they don't understand. Like, you don't understand what you are asking me to give up.
Yeah.
You're asking me to give up me. It's not just this group of people.
Yeah.
It's this really big part of me. And I don't know who I am or what I am apart from them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that a lot of Westerners can't wrap their head around, just how much family is involved in our identity and how much our relationship with the family means to us. And it's almost impossible, actually, to not care what they say. I don't care what strangers say, but I definitely care what my family says. But I found that is hard for some people to wrap their head around. And it's also hard for a lot of therapists to wrap their head around.
I learned this when I was seeing a therapist around the time that the pandemic started, and a lot of white therapists that I've met, it's such an individualist culture. And Sherry and I have had conversations about white people struggling to take accountability for things that they didn't do. I didn't colonize your people, so why should I do anything? It wasn't me, because they just look at themselves as individuals. They don't look at themselves as part of a community. And so with my experience with white therapists, it was always like, you need to cut your parents off. You need to not talk to them, but I can't do that. I think it's hard with therapists who don't understand the cultural context and understand how your family is a part of you, and you can't just, you can set boundaries, which I think is fine, but it became hard when I would say, I can't go no contact with my parents. And they would say, then that's it. Like this all or nothing. And I don't think they realize what they're really asking when they say, go no contact, screw your family, all of that.
Yeah, definitely. I've had that experience with therapists also. My first therapist was a guy, Caucasian, and he just couldn't get it. When I was like, I don't feel safe around men. And he's like, yes, you need to look around and realize if you're actually in danger or not, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you don't get it. And then when talking about family stuff, and after a while, I was like, I can't work with a therapist who can't get it and who isn't willing to explore it. When I feel afraid of men, it's like the way that many women feel afraid of men. But as a trans woman, I have this extra layer of if men are attracted to me, and I don't know, lots of men are attracted to me, but when I am not, in quotes, unclockable, there are ways that you could know that I'm a trans woman if you know what you're looking for or just happen to notice. And that puts me in extreme danger, because then suddenly the men think, oh, this is a man pretending to be a woman who's tricked me into being gay. There's transphobia and homophobia mixed in there. And then at the same time, there's this person of color thing where Asian women are viewed as docile and obliging. And I don't know, we're just viewed as like little girls all the time.
Yeah.
So for therapists to not understand, that's how I die. That's how trans women die.
Yeah.
You can't understand that, then we can't work together. And I don't feel safe with my family anymore.
Yeah.
And finally, I found this therapist. She's not Chinese, but she's Indigenous and queer. And she at least has enough cultural sensitivity to be, what part of this is cultural? What part of this is this? And we're able to explore that together. And for her to be like, yeah, you not feeling safe around men when you're walking out in the world, I'm not going to lie, that's your reality. You are unsafe. When I heard that, I was like, oh, are you supposed to say that? Aren't you supposed to help me feel better? But she's like, no, this is the reality of your life. So we need to work within that reality, because if you don't, then you're going to be unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah. For people listening who may or may not have had bad experiences with therapists, there are good therapists out there. Keep trying till you find one, because there are people who will help and who are great, but we just have to find somebody who gets where we're coming from. And sometimes that's not very obvious when you're a minority, and then even harder when you have intersectionalities of being a minority and being queer. So keep searching for a better therapist. Don't settle.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I really like when you were talking about her asking what part of this is cultural, and validating your experience too is huge. It can be very helpful when someone says, yeah, that is true, rather than saying, oh, it's in your brain, or I don't understand that. I think it's important to have somebody validate your experiences.
Yeah. And as Asian women, we get that a lot. Oh, you're just making it up.
Yeah.
It's not the reality. And I know my reality. Yeah.
I still struggle with this too, questioning myself or saying, am I overthinking it, or is this real? And I think as Asian women, having people make you question yourself, that's a really hard thing to unlearn and get out of.
It's almost like culturally, we try to not think about it and hope it goes away.
Uh-huh.
And usually it doesn't. You mentioned that your wife was very supportive of your career change. How was it with the rest of your family?
My kids were cool with it. They're what's after Gen Z, Alpha. They're amazing. That generation, I'm waiting for them to grow up to take over the world. I'm like, please take over the world so you can make it a better place for all of us to live in. That career didn't really mean anything. I think they think it's cooler. Oh, my other mom owns a business and she does these beautiful things. I'm not sure how they feel about me being a model, but my parents really struggled with it. My mom was an entrepreneur, but I think it was, why would you put 16 years into a career and just turn around and throw it all away? At the end, when I was in oil and gas, I was making over $100,000 a year as a contractor. And they're like, why would you throw that all away to become low income? I feel like they thought that I was just playing at it, until I had my grand opening at my first retail location. And then they came to that and there were, I think, 80 people. And then it became a real thing. They're like, oh, you're not just playing with plants and saying that you're building a business. It was the beginning of them seeing it as, okay, you're doing a thing. You're not just slacking off and throwing off your obligations because you want to run away from them. It wasn't about that. I think their generation also, my dad worked for the same company forever.
Yeah.
30 years or whatever it was. The longest I've worked at a company is 3 or 4. And later in my career, if I made it to 2 years, I thought that was a big deal. And I think now working for my own company, that's the longest I've been at a job. I don't know. My extended family didn't really talk about it, but my ex-wife was very encouraging and she comes from a very entrepreneurial home. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, our parents tend to view it as throwing it away or as their sacrifices are being thrown away, which is what I felt in my case. To me, it's like they've sacrificed so that we can have options, so that we can have choices, so that we don't have to do just the only job that we could find or the only job that will sustain us. That is success. Your child can do whatever they want and still be alive and be happy and make enough money to live a healthy, balanced life. But sometimes it's hard to get that point across.
Yeah, there's definitely this element of merit. You can do this thing and you have to hit a certain level of notoriety or fame, that metric is. And once you hit that, then it's okay, you're legit. Yeah. And I don't know, for music, look, I have this many streams or this many fans, or this is how much money I'm making from my music or art. And then it's okay, it's a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, my family still doesn't think I work. The other day I was talking to my grandma and she calls me in the middle of the day and she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm working. She said, you're working? I was like, yeah, what do you think I do all day? She's like, make music? I'm like, yeah, working. She's like, oh. But it's so hard for them to imagine that something that is fun can also be work.
Yeah. I feel like their generation, the idea that life is not fun, that's just what they grew up with. And so they can't really wrap their head around enjoying your work because to them, life is just full of things to do that you don't want to do, but you have to. And I definitely feel like when you mentioned there's certain milestones where now it's legit, I think I struggled to even call myself a musician or an artist because I didn't hit these milestones. So am I qualified? And I had to get to a point where I could be like, as long as I'm doing it, I'm it, even if I don't have these milestones under my belt.
I had a very similar struggle when I switched careers. What label do I assign to myself? It was really hard to say, no, I'm an artist. I'm not a botanist. The planting style that I work in is very much an artistic thing. And it was going from a respected Asian career to artist. There's no respect there. That doesn't bring honor to my family, but that's what I do. And then when I started modeling, to start calling myself a model, I started modeling at age 43 because I'm like, there is zero Asian trans representation. They're not giving it to us. So I'm going to become a model and that's how I'm going to make it. But to do one photo shoot and be like, yeah, I'm a model now. And I feel like our families often will give us titles and roles and we're like, okay, this is who I am. But no, this is what was passed down to us. That's not necessarily who we are. People take photos of me and they use the photos for advertisement or branding or whatever it is. So yeah, I'm a model. And then it took me a long time to call myself an advocate, a trans advocate, because I share a lot on social media and I'm just sharing my experiences. And I write very much for non-queer, non-trans audiences because the queers and the trans people, they have their experience. And also for non-Asian people, if these are my experiences, I need you to see that there are people like me out there. When you encounter them, they're just a person. And then realize, oh, that's advocacy. And then when people are like, oh, do you want to go on a podcast? It's starting to, I guess so. But now it's, do you want to go on a podcast? Or I'll stumble on a podcast and I'll be like, do you want me to be on your podcast? Because representation is so important, especially being, I think it's called third culture, where we're between cultures. So we're our own culture because we're not a blended culture within ourselves. At least I don't feel like we are. Yeah. Or maybe we haven't gotten there yet. But there's this Chinese part of me and there's this very Western part of me. And there's this rift that's in the middle and I flip back and forth. And there hasn't been for me this blended space that's like a melting pot, so to speak, where all of the things just flow into each other. It's like I'm either this or this at one time. And oftentimes they're at odds.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be difficult to tease out what is preserving tradition and culture and what is fighting for progress. And sometimes those two things just don't go together. And then you're like, if I want progress, does that mean that I am denying my tradition? But then if I don't agree with the tradition, should this tradition be kept? Yeah, I struggle with that since I was a kid and I still struggle with it. So I don't think it's going away. We're just stuck in this sometimes here, sometimes there situation.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with many Asian cultures, they didn't necessarily start out that way, but as they are now, they are super patriarchal. I call it the before times, before my transition. In the before times, I didn't experience that patriarchal oppression in the way that I experience it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I didn't experience it as a not realized trans woman. I wouldn't call it privilege because in very real other ways, it was very powerfully suppressing and oppressing me. But to have that contrast of experiencing no misogyny directed towards me, to experience all of the misogyny directed towards me, and being like, but I want to connect with my Chinese culture. Yet Chinese culture is so patriarchal and so misogynistic. How do I do that? How do you embrace your culture while rejecting those things that are so tied into the culture?
Yeah.
It's almost like we have to be part of this evolving of the culture. And it's, I don't have answers for that, but it's just, I don't know. Like, how do I be Chinese but not be stuck in the bad parts?
Yeah. So what would be an example of things that you noticed after your transition that were misogynistic that you never had to deal with before?
The very first thing was I lost my voice, where before, if I was talking, people were listening and people were agreeing. The first time I noticed it was 3 months into hormone replacement therapy. So I got earrings. I got my ears pierced on the same day that I got my hormones because I was celebrating. So I had those in for, 6 weeks in or whatever. And it was like time to take them out. And I was at family dinner with my parents and my brother and sister-in-law. And my mom is a goldsmith, a jeweler. And I was like, hey, Mom, can you help me use your tools to remove my earrings? I can't do it with my fingers and it's threaded. And she's like, oh, no, you just pull on them. The normal earring back. She's like, you just pull them. I'm like, no, they're threaded. And she's like, I've never seen earrings like that. Because she's the expert. She's the goldsmith and jeweler. And I'm like, I don't know. That's just what they put in my ear when they did the piercing. And then my brother got in there and was just trying to do it with his fingers. And it was hurting because it's still sensitive after 6 weeks. And I'm like, ow, stop it. And finally, my sister-in-law, who also does some jewelry work, just went into my mom's workshop and got the little pliers and did it. And I was really upset. And they're like, why are you so upset that you can't get your earrings off? I am not upset that I can't get my earrings off. I am upset because I am talking and nobody is listening to me except for my sister-in-law, who went and got the tools and did the thing that I asked for. I didn't ask for your opinion about my earrings. I just needed help taking them off. And I told you exactly how I needed help taking them off. Whereas before, if that was the situation, it would just be like, okay, just let me go get my tools.
Yeah.
That was the first thing. I also had a bunch of my old guy friends over at my apartment after I had separated from my ex-wife, and it was just like, hey, let's catch up. It's been a while. We were having hot pot because it's easy. And so everybody brought stuff and I was in the kitchen. It was a small 1-bedroom apartment. And they dropped off stuff in the kitchen where I was. And then they all chatted amongst themselves. And then afterwards, nobody offered to clean up. But before, it would always be like, hey, what can I do? Do you need help with anything? And then suddenly it was like, you're a woman, your place is in the kitchen, do the kitchen things, do the cleaning up things. And I was like, really? We have been friends for 20, 25 years. I thought that would mean something. And suddenly, zero respect.
Wow.
I am friends with 2 of these people still.
Yeah.
Because if you can't respect me as a woman, then that's the deal breaker.
Yeah.
We're done. 20 years of friendship doesn't get me respect. Okay. I guess I know who you are.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would have made a difference if there were Caucasian guys in the group, but they were all Chinese.
Wow. You would never even think of that.
It's so crazy. I don't know. I was watching this TikTok. I learned so much from TikTok. This one creator was saying that a lot of men don't necessarily see women as humans. They see the gender first and then they assign woman, kitchen. This is what she does. This is who she is. It's so crazy to me that the treatment would change once it's okay, woman, she's going to take care of it. She's going to do it.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves is when males around me, we're in a meeting or something, and they expect me to do the secretarial things like take notes. Or if I meet somebody and I mention something interesting and they'll be like, can you send me an email about it? No. Who the hell am I? Your secretary? It is very annoying when they do that.
Yeah. Even men who call themselves feminists and they can go through their life with normal interactions with other women that aren't overtly sexist. I think when it comes to their personal lives and the way they view women, I still don't necessarily think that it's that much different than other men. I think there's still an element of they don't view us as having the same agency that they do, the same complexity that they do.
We don't get the same respect, definitely. In my transition, one of the other things that's really struck me is I call them sidewalk dynamics, where, when 2 people approach each other going opposite ways on a sidewalk, women are known to make space for men to walk by. And the first time that it happened to me, this man was coming the other way and I was walking and I just felt this. I was like, I need to move. If I don't move, there is going to be trouble. I'm going to get run over or pushed over. And I deeply felt that I needed to move. It wasn't that I had decided, I am a woman, so I need to make room. No, it was just like, if I don't make room, a bad thing is going to happen. And when I took time to think about it, the deal is that when 2 men approach each other on a sidewalk, there is a pissing contest. We offer each other a level of respect. It's let's see who is going to move. Let's see who is going to be the most, in quotes, alpha. And so there's this pissing contest and you play chicken or whatever. When a man encounters a woman, there is no pissing contest. There's no, let's see who is going to move. They navigate the world. There's a woman in front of me. Of course, she is going to make way for me. And so the way that they walk reflects that, and we pick that up. And then if you layer on top of that being an Asian woman, because the stereotype is docile, you are even more expected to move. And when I encounter Caucasian women, I'm expected to move. Even though I'm 5'9", and when I wear my heels, I'm 6'1.5". But I'm the one expected to move, even though, I don't know, I guess height-wise, it's like I'm pretty imposing over 6 feet in my heels. But
That's very interesting, because I remember in psychology class, we were talking about how taller people are given more respect. If you're taller, then people assume that you know what you're talking about and that people respect you more in meetings. So it's interesting that being tall does not necessarily give you those privileges if you're a woman of color.
That dynamic around Caucasian women too, you would think that there would be more commonality, but because they have a little bit of privilege, they've got white supremacy. I feel like in the corporate world, racism is a lot more common than people realize. My dynamic with white women is they will assert themselves over me and they'll assert their privilege over me and they'll talk over me, just assert some sort of dominance. Even though they've been oppressed, because they've got that little bit of privilege, they will wield it over you.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. So what does an ally look like to you?
People can hate me for saying this, but you're not an ally until the rubber meets the road. You can read all the things, you can make the social media posts, but you're not an ally until you are present in a situation where somebody needs you to speak up or stand up or care for you, like care for, let's make it personal, like care for me. Until you do that thing, you're not an ally yet.
Yeah.
We had this huge family dinner because it was my uncle's 80th birthday and he came from Hong Kong and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the dinner, we were all sitting there and he looks at my eldest cousin. She was sitting beside me. He looks at her and in Cantonese, he says, 呢個係大表姐. So this is the eldest sister cousin. And then he turns to me, looks me dead in the eye with a shit-eating grin on his face. And he says, 呢個係大表哥, eldest brother, cousin. And I lost my shit. I raised my voice at him, which is not a thing that you do to an Asian elder. And people were they were trying to everybody freaked out because this is not a thing that I ever do. Because as a good Chinese kid, you would never do that.
Yeah.
I was cursing. They've probably never seen me curse. They know my situation, right? And they were managing the situation. They were trying to calm me down. And the dialogue was all, oh, he's old. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's hard for him to change. My dad was like, you have to give face. You need to calm down. You need to give face. I was like, I'm not sticking around for this. I want my kids and we are leaving. And the only person in that situation. So everybody was trying to gaslight me into being like, he doesn't know what he said. He doesn't know what he's saying. And he knew exactly what he was doing, exactly what he was saying. And it was all on me. Like I was the bad person just because he is the eldest brother. And my mom was the one who gathered the kids and bundled them up and got us out the door. And so in that situation, my mom was the only one who was an ally, even though I had cousins who were like, oh, that's cool, you're trans. But when it came down to it, and even my dad, when I came out to my dad, I was like, I'm really worried about the extended family. And he was in Papa Bear mode at the time. And he's, don't you worry about the family. I will deal with the family. But when push came to shove, when I needed him to stand up and be like, don't fucking talk to my daughter that way. He couldn't do it. He couldn't stand up to his brother. And I won't say that my dad doesn't love me, but he also wasn't an ally.
Yeah.
Only my mom was. And it's not that my mom and I don't have struggles and trying to work through building a new type of relationship, but none of my cousins stood up for me. Nobody asked the question, Cece never behaves like this. What has this man done to make her react like this? Because she never reacts like this. So an ally has to do, I've heard people say being an ally, that's a verb, to be an ally. Until you've done the thing, you're not yet an ally. And in online spaces, that's standing up for somebody when they're being harassed. I had this thing on the street where this huge dude was harassing me and shouting at me and stuff. And I was sobbing on the street corner, not able to move. And there were lots of people around, but nobody came up and said, hey, are you okay? Do you need somebody to stay with you? Or do you need to be somewhere? Can I call somebody for you? I don't know who those people are, but some of them probably identify as allies. But when you see somebody get verbally assaulted for being trans and then see that they're hugely distraught, I don't expect you to stand up to the big dude. Yeah, that's dangerous. But to not even check on the person afterwards, that's not allyship, right?
Yeah.
When the rubber meets the road, that's when you can or cannot call yourself an ally.
Yeah. And I guess for those of us who have grown in Asian culture where there's a lot of this pressure in terms of what you can and can't do in front of elders, it might be a good thing for us all to think about What would I do in a situation like this? And just prepare ahead of time as an ally. Prepare ahead of time. Okay, if one of my cousins came out as gay and a family member was gaslighting them or was provoking them, what would I do? What should I do? What can I do? We really should start thinking about those things and trying to prepare ourselves, because sometimes in the moment you blank out and you don't know what's going on. But maybe if we start thinking about those things, we can come up with ways that we can help instead of just standing there and doing nothing.
Yeah, we definitely default to our lowest level of training. And I would go, if you want to be really serious about allyship, do role play, practice scenarios that might pop up. And it's because we can think things, but like our bodies remember. And so you can practice those things. Conversations around pronouns. Like when somebody is, I use these pronouns, it's so hard to switch. And you can just practice it on your own. Even the act of practicing, that's allyship. I am preparing to do the thing that I one day will need to do.
Yeah, that's a great idea. One of the topics that you checked off on our list was Eurocentric aesthetics. How has that affected the way you perceive yourself growing up, and has it changed?
Oh my goodness. Growing up very much. In the before times, Eurocentric beauty standards, that's all we see in North America. And if you can see me, I am of a slight build. And this was always the case, even when I was under the influence of testosterone. And you will see Asian men who have muscles and stuff and blah, blah, blah. And it's this thing that makes a good looking guy. So in the before times, I tried to work out and eat the protein and fat in the right combination and enough. And I never got big. I never got big muscles and definitely felt less than. And it's funny because now when I look back at my photos from university, I'm like, why the hell wasn't I playing the role of male model at the time? I was so good looking, but like, I couldn't see it in myself and I couldn't feel it in myself because I didn't fit those standards. But now I'm exposed to a lot more, especially with the rise of K-pop and these beautiful men who wear makeup and they are slight of build. They have muscles, but they're not huge, bulging muscles. And that was what I looked like then. I was beautiful. And then now in my transition, there was a lot of that. Actually, it's a weird double-sided thing where it was like I didn't fit Asian beauty standards in Asia because I'm taller and I don't have a round face. And in my transition, there was a lot of dysphoria around features of my body. Like, oh, this feels like a boy feature. It feels like a boy feature and I don't like it. Why can't I be like the models and the actresses? All the models and actresses are white and there are very few Asian actresses and models and stuff. So there's no way that I can attain this thing. My eyes are hooded. I have the double lids, but they're hooded and I can't do any of the makeup looks because of the hooded. But I also don't have a monolid, so I can't do the Asian looks. In the end, I had to figure out this is how I do my makeup. This is what works for me. And it's some weird mix of different makeup trends. But it was like, oh, my boobs are so small. And this is a very North American thing, the whole big boob thing. In Europe, it's not really that much of a thing, but it was like, oh, my boobs are so small. And are they ever going to grow to, I don't know, in quotes, a decent size? And it's, what does that even mean? I think I do have quite hourglass figure now, but going through that medical transition, there's this need to look this way for people to see me as a woman. All those ways are dictated by big media. There was a time when I was, oh, my arms are so big. And my friend was just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
There's just, my shoulders are so big. And she's like, they're not, but I can see that you can't see that right now. But you go look up Michelle Obama's arms when you get home. I was like, what? Okay. So I did that. You see all these articles, people talking about how she shouldn't wear sleeveless. She's too bulky and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that makes no sense. Her arms are beautiful. They look strong. So I was texting this to my friend and she was like, uh-huh. And I was like, oh, shit. Okay, I got it. And that was a big shift in me starting to look at real people and real women's bodies. my body is not weird. My body is just a body and it's got these different characteristics. And my shoulders are like this woman's shoulders and my jawline is like this woman's jawline. And that has no bearing on my beauty just because I see these people and I think they're beautiful. So what is all the stuff in the magazines and the websites and on the movies? Like that's just somebody's curation, media's curation of beauty.
And or Photoshop.
Yeah. But when I'm looking out in the real world and I'm like, oh, she's so beautiful. Or like my friend who was telling me about the arms and I'm like, oh, she has shoulders wider than mine. But I think that she's so beautiful. So why do I think that I'm not? I had to claim that for myself and then look at Asian people and not just look at Caucasian people. And be like, yeah, this person is like me. She's beautiful. I'm a little bit like her. And everything, everywhere, all at once. In the West, people don't know Michelle Yeoh. Even though she was in a James Bond movie and Jackie Chan movies and stuff, but they don't know her. Suddenly people are like, she's like your sister. You have such similar features and stuff. And it was weird having a celebrity that I could look at and be like, people think that she's beautiful and we look alike.
Yeah, that is definitely huge. Yeah, you mentioned that you were looking back at your college pictures and thinking, man, I look great. And I had a similar experience where I was looking back at my childhood photos and I always thought I was fat. And I looked at those photos and I'm like, this is a normal sized girl. What was I thinking? I guess some adults teased me about having big cheeks. And they told me, oh, you're so cute, you're so round and things. And that was in my head. I grew up thinking I was fat. And then I'm looking back at those pictures, I'm like, I'm not even close to fat. But it's funny how we can see ourselves in such a distorted way that doesn't match reality at all. And then looking back, it's like, oh, that was not true.
But that's why representation is so important. That's why when I saw your podcast, I was like, hey, can I be on your podcast? Because when we don't see ourselves, we don't know what we can be. For me growing up, I didn't know that there could be Asian trans women who weren't just treated as prostitutes in Thailand.
Yeah.
That there could be an Asian trans woman who just lives life and has kids and runs a business. So when I saw that, I'm like, yeah, we need to make more representation because nobody is giving it to us.
Yeah.
So we have to make it. If we want our kids and our youth to see themselves, to know that, hey, you can follow your passions. Hey, you can be who you feel that you are deep inside.
Yeah.
You don't have to subscribe to what media tells you. You don't have to subscribe to what your family tells you necessarily. You can be Asian and American or Canadian or whatever it is. You can be Asian and queer. You can be in this splendid space and still claim your Asian identity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I found you, I think, on Instagram, and I followed you with the intention of asking you to come on the podcast, but then you beat me to it. I'm like, yes.
That's because I creep everybody back. I'm like, oh, who's this following? Who's this following? Because I have to be careful. There's just...
Yeah, I did that too.
Creepy
I just blocked, some creepy people out. To end the interview, we are going to ask you a few rapid fire questions.
I warn you, I'm not good at rapid fire. I'm verbose. I will try.
All right. Ari, do you want to do the honors?
Okay, so the first question is, what was the first language you learned?
Cantonese.
What language do you speak with your parents?
English. It used to be Cantonese all the time and then they gave up.
What's an Asian food that you should like but don't?
Oh, that's so hard. I was going to say durian, but a lot of Asian people don't like durian either. No, I love lots of foods. Although lately my tastes have shifted because of my anxiety medications. And so there's lots of meats that I used to love and they taste disgusting now. Yeah.
Hopefully the next question is easier.
Yeah. What's an Asian food that you'll never get tired of?
No, that's really hard too, because I love all the foods. I don't know. Pocky.
Oh, I haven't had that in a while.
I have a story about Pocky though. It's because we had this one Japanese restaurant where always at the end of the meal, women and children got offered Pocky. And this one time, my ex-wife invited me out for lunch with the kids. And it was really early on in transition. And the serving staff offered me a Pocky. And I just cried in the car afterwards.
That's awesome.
And the last question is, what is your favorite plant?
My favorite plant right now is probably string of turtles. It's got these little round leaves that are connected on this vine, and it's like a turtle shell pattern. And I might have a thing for turtles. If you're listening and not watching, I have a stuffed turtle. And all through university, I carried a little beanie baby turtle in my backpack. I don't know. So string of turtles.
Awesome.
That wraps up the rapid fire. Thanks so much for chatting with us. It's been an honor. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you? Anything that you have going on?
On Instagram, I am at the transplanter, the same on TikTok. Instagram tends to be a little bit more serious in nature. TikTok is a little bit more fun because it's TikTok. There's serious stuff on TikTok too. And I'll let you figure out why I picked the username that I picked.
It's an awesome username.
Yeah, it's funner when people figure it out and they're just like, oh, that's... Yeah, if you're in Calgary, you can come visit me at the plant shop. If you want to send me a DM, you want to connect, Instagram is probably the best place. Do not start with hi on one line by itself. Mention that you saw me on the podcast or whatever, because I am draconian with the way that I manage my message requests. So if it's just a simple hi with nothing else, no context, I'm probably going to block you because there's lots of bad people out there who do that. But I love connecting with people.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We can't wait to share this episode with our audience, and we wish you the best forward.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate what you're doing, using your platform and building a platform for representation and helping us all to see that we aren't on our own. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor for us, really. We started this podcast. We were actually brainstorming about how we were going to market a song we wrote together. And then we had so much to talk about. We're like, this should be a podcast. And then we completely forgot about the song. We haven't even finished recording it.
Oh, yeah.
But we've been having so many great conversations on this podcast. And it's really taken a life of its own where it's been a lot more impactful than we realized it would be. And it's created a space that we didn't realize was missing in our community. So we feel really honored to provide that space for people.
Sherry and I were talking, and some of our guests are like, it feels like therapy, but for us too, it feels therapeutic for me. It's been nice to have a space to talk about this, especially when we've had podcast guests who are people that I've known for a long time. They come on the show and I'm like, wait, we've never talked about our experiences being Asian American. Why not?
And also have a space where so many different experiences are talked about, because we're so often seen as a monolith. And even if we want to see more diverse stories, sometimes it's hard to come by. So hopefully this will be a place where everyone can find a little bit of themselves.
Here are our takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, you are not an ally until you have performed an act of allyship. This can include online, defending people who are harassed, on the streets, checking in on people who are being harassed and obviously distraught, stay with them and help them feel safe, or in front of family, redirect the conversation towards transphobic or homophobic or racist comments, rather than gaslighting the person and managing their very valid feelings about being disrespected. Number 2, even people who identify as allies often freeze or do nothing when they witness an incident in person. This is especially compounded by cultural norms like never raising your voice towards elders. It is therefore important to practice and prepare your responses ahead of time and make sure that you'll know what to do when it happens. You can practice how you might check in on someone who you saw being harassed, or you can practice how you might address a homophobic, transphobic, or racist comment. Practice how to be an ally in situations that require allyship, so that in those moments, you can be prepared to respond, because those moments will happen. Number 3, trans people didn't decide to change who they are, but rather were playing the roles imposed on them by society based on their sex, despite those roles not aligning with who they are. Number 4, trans women face additional layers of oppression and danger from men than cis women, and deal with fears that cis women do not have to think about. Understanding these experiences is an important part of allyship and of dismantling transphobic and homophobic misconceptions. Number 5, the curation of mainstream media leads to many of us to have unrealistic expectations of what a beautiful body should look like, and have body dysmorphia when we can't achieve the same looks. It helps to see photos of real people, not just models and actresses, but people in whom we can see a little bit of ourselves. This is why representation matters so much. Number 6, it is important to understand cultural context and intersectionality. The experience of an LGBTQ+ Asian person can often look different than that of a white LGBTQ+ person. Family is so closely intertwined with identity for many people in the Asian diaspora. Understanding cultural context is important for understanding the experience of AAPI people in the LGBTQ+ community. Number 7. Third culture kids are not necessarily a blend of their different cultures, but rather, they go between their cultures and are more of one than another at certain points. And finally, number 8. Women are often given unsolicited opinions rather than solicited help, and women often still face expectations from men regarding responsibilities and labor. If there's only men, they help each other out, but as soon as there's one woman, she's expected to do the cooking and the cleaning, while the men leave her to do it rather than help.
And that's it for today. If you know someone who would enjoy this episode, we hope you'll share it with them and build on our show to have your own nuanced conversations about the relationships we have with our cultural identities and how they affect us. If you'd like to be featured or nominate a guest, please follow and DM us at NuancesPod on Instagram. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and tune in next week for another nuanced conversation.